Welcome to the Qigong Global Summit, presented by the Shift Network. And now your host, Sharron Rose.
Hello, everyone. Guten Tag. Hallo. Hello and ciao. Ciao bella. I'm Sharron Rose with the Qigong Global Summit, reaching out to you across the world. Today, we have a very, very interesting guest, Lama Tantrapa. As Lama Tantrapa was practicing medical Qigong at Portland Qigong Clinic, he could not help to wonder why some patients regularly failed to do any homework between the sessions. Most of them received prescriptions for some meditations and energy exercises, recommended working on their postural alignments, and suggested certain lifestyle or dietary changes. Investigation in this matter revealed that most patients tended to get distracted by millions of things people are busy with these days. And I can tell you that the intensity of life these days, what's expected of us, is just going wild. Are you all experiencing this? So what happens is that we forget about our prescriptions or even experience internal resistance to the authority figure telling us what to do or how to change these lifestyles. Eventually, Lama arrived to the realization that people heal when and to the degree they are ready to heal. So he embarked on the journey of searching for the healing modality that would facilitate people's readiness to heal. After being unable to find such a modality, he decided to create one. And I have to say that this is one of the themes of the summit, to inspire and empower all of us to really find that creative spark within ourselves, through the practice of Qigong, and to bring out our gifts so that we can share them with the world. The resulting Qigong coaching, which Lama Tantrapa created, turned out to be exactly what he was looking for, as it integrated the ancient energy arts, which he'd been practicing since the age of 6, with several methodologies of coaching that he learned from such world-class experts as Tony Robbins, Michael Hall, Brendan Burchard, and Bill Barron, to name only a few. So today, you are welcome to discover for yourself how Qigong coaching addresses some of the most prevalent health problems and how it heals the very root causes of health. Welcome, Lama Tantrapa.
Thank you so much.
So since you are of Russian descent, let's speak to all our Russian audience out there.
Привет, как дела? Я думаю, что у вас все хорошо получится, и вы научитесь себя исцелять.
Thank you. Thank you. Today we're going to go very deep into healing, and particularly energy blockages. What can we do about them? Where do they come from? What is the root cause of trauma? So let's begin with that. From all your studies and in the Qigong coaching tradition, what do you feel is actually the root cause of trauma?
Well, as you probably know, nobody's perfectly 100% healthy. And you probably will not find anybody who's alive and 100% unhealthy, because that probably would mean being dead. So most people experience different levels of health at different times. And instead of black and white way of perceiving health as either well or feeling ill, we learn how to assess our current level of health on scale, on a certain degree, say from 1 to 100. And in this case, most readings or most assessments would fall somewhere close to the middle of that scale, basically forming the so-called bell curve. And as you scan your body to check. You may also find that some parts of the body feel more alive or more vibrant than others. In other words, different parts of the body don't experience the same level of health. Some may feel sore or tense and perhaps express degree of discomfort. Others may feel okay or quite healthy. So in other words, what we do is we learn how to scan ourselves in order to recognize the areas that need some help. And when we do this kind of scanning exercises, we also discover some degree of energy awareness. For some people who are more visually oriented, so-called visual learners, it's easier to perceive energy visually in form of certain auras or colors or certain areas of the body that have different energetic qualities. And we use this type of visualization for self-assessment. And when we recognize that there are different parts of the body that feel differently, we also can touch them, and that gives us an ability to discover what it's like to scan the body, not only visually, but also through touch. This means that some parts of the body may not feel sore until you touch them, but when you touch them, they may be tender to touch. As a matter of fact, I believe that that's how most of the body work modalities, as well as acupuncture and acupressure, get developed. They get developed because people were touching each other and themselves. And just like all animals, we humans also have tendency to focus our attention on those parts of the body that are tender to touch. In a sense, those parts of the body are kind of sending signals of distress. Hey, pay attention here. I'm not doing so well. And where attention goes, energy flows. So when you give attention to those affected or afflicted parts of the body, whether they've been injured or just compromised through a misuse, they receive energy. Where attention goes, energy flows. In Chinese, there is a phrase, yi dao, qi dao. As a matter of fact, the name of my family tradition of Qigong is also qi dao, only spelled, dao is spelled as the way rather than direction. But either way, what we do is we learn how to develop the ability to discover ways to empower those parts of the body that are disempowered or weak. So we recognize that the main causes of ill health, as well as pain and suffering, often boil down to energetic imbalances, stagnation, or depletion. So what causes the imbalance, the depletion, or stagnation? Well, those would be also referred to as energy blockages. And what causes the energy blockages? We have to go to the root cause. So we don't just say, well, energy blockages are bad and we need to get rid of them. Because if we try to get rid of them without understanding where they come from, more will come. So in other words, we'll be just chasing the symptoms instead of addressing the root causes. I'm sure you're familiar with this idea of chasing the symptoms from the Western medical modalities, right?
For sure. For sure. It's interesting. We just had this experience where my son got a stomach flu. He went to Western doctors, and all they did was kind of give him Gatorade. And then he went to a Chinese doctor who is also a Qigong master, and he is thrilled because what he's finding is that this doctor is looking at him as a whole being, not just a symptom. So I totally understand what you're speaking about. Let's go back to trauma. We've been talking about trauma, but in your opinion, where does it begin and how does it affect our whole system?
Well, most of us have experienced traumas in our lives. whether physical injuries or emotional traumas or dramas, or maybe even tragedies. All of these affect us in different ways. If it is a physical trauma or injury, it stands to reason that the body will need to heal itself, to recuperate, to restore homeostasis, so to speak. In other words, the body will start healing itself from a trauma. In most cases, it's the insider job to heal, because even if we have broken bones, no therapeutic interventions are going to mend bones. The bones actually will have to mend because the body provides nutrients and calcium and other nutrients, and also oxygen, and most importantly, energy, life force. Basically, without all of this internal work, the body would never heal. No matter how much we can provide some medications or therapeutic interventions or even surgeries, it's an inside job to heal. And so what we do is we learn how to facilitate that. What does the body need in order to heal? Well, for cells to propagate, to regrow where they were damaged or injured, for the bones to mend, there needs to be certain conditions. And these conditions essentially boil down to having a reasonable level of nutrition, a reasonable level of oxygenation, reasonable level of energy supply. And when there is a substantial amount of energy and all the other conditions, then the body will heal itself. In most cases, the therapeutic interventions are just facilitating a person's readiness to heal, but they are not really designed to improve the person's readiness. So the person basically operates from within, unconsciously healing. What if we could heal consciously? What if we realize that in most cases, even when we have injury or trauma of some sort, those also can be affecting us much more if we add insult to injury, so to speak. For example, through tension. Often when we experience either emotional or physical trauma, we tense up. We tense up so that we don't feel pain. For example, like if you hurt your hand, well, you can tense up your arm, you won't feel pain in your hand as much. Basically, what we do is we create a certain blockage to disconnect from that part of the body that is affected or afflicted. Now, if we create an energy blockage, it will not receive as much energy. And so that actually causes a delay in healing or makes healing impossible. As a matter of fact, that's also inside our job. So if we realize that we create our own tension, nobody does tension to us, then we can take responsibility for our own tension. And the tension creates energy blockages because energy doesn't flow freely through the areas of tension, just like the circulation of blood and lymph also get occluded or stifled by tension. And so what we do is we learn how to work with tension. Most people are not holding tension consciously. So if you tell them to stop tensing up or tell them to relax, they won't be able to because they don't even know that they're tense. Or even if they recognize they're tense, they are not doing this tension consciously. And so they cannot stop doing that which they don't know that they're doing. Besides, there is no signal of relaxation the central nervous system can send to the body. It can only send more signals of contraction or fewer signals of contraction, which means it's essentially the practice of non-doing. Doing less tension equals relaxation. Does it make sense?
Yes, yes. So we've been talking about Qigong coaching. When
Right.
someone comes to see you for this coaching, how do you use Qigong to assist them to release this tension and heal these blockages?
Well, as I mentioned, we engage in some practices, for example, scanning and assessing how different parts of our bodies are doing. We also assess over time. Have we been as tense all the time, or has there been some fluctuations? Some more tensions on some occasions, some less tension on other occasions. Most people have relatively habituated patterns of holding tension in their bodies that developed relatively early in their childhoods. So by the age of 5 or 6 or maybe 7 years of age, the child has basically developed some degree of sense of self, who they think they are, their identity. And this identity is based on habitual states of consciousness. So one child may be very excitable, and that's a particular state of consciousness associated with that. Another child may be sad or depressed. Well, that's another state of consciousness. Another child may be aggressive, and that may be another state of consciousness. Another child may be shy. Well, it's a different state of consciousness. So what we do is we basically develop certain sense of how we are in the world and how we relate to the events in our lives. All of these habitual states of consciousness manifest somatically in our physical bodies in the form of particular holding patterns. In other words, a person who is shy, for example, has a very specific holding pattern. It's almost like they're trying to become smaller, to occupy less volume, less space. In other words, they are trying to be more compact. Or maybe the child was bullied, and of course it was a survival mechanism to try to be a smaller target. Now that doesn't mean that it's a healthy way to go throughout the rest of the life. So if one technique or one approach worked as a survival mechanism at a certain point in time, it means it works under certain circumstances. It doesn't mean that it works under all circumstances. As a matter of fact, we know that there is no one holding pattern that works universally for everyone, because we would have all been holding ourselves that way by now. But instead, people have idiosyncratic holding patterns. In other words, they have certain combinations of their states of consciousness that get habituated over time, often since childhood or throughout their bringing. They develop sense of identity that includes how they hold themselves. So, for example, if a child grew up with a high level of self-confidence, often they will be holding up. Maybe their parents even told them that they need to hold themselves up a little bit, to look taller or just to have better posture. Now, of course, it's not a better posture because it's a form of holding pattern. There's tension involved. And where there is tension, it's not the great posture. It's actually a postural misalignment. Now, another child may be used to slouching. Maybe it's an expression of low self-esteem, or maybe it's just low energy, or sadness, or depression even. In that case, the child is going to have a habituated holding pattern that they will basically hold on to for the rest of their life, most likely, unless they experience another dramatic event in their lives which will completely alter their perception of self or change their identity. So some people with multiple personality disorders actually go through a series of personalities. Well, personality is what we perceive them as. What they relate to is what we call identity. So it's like the inside of the mask. The personality comes from the word persona, which originally was the mask that ancient Greek actors wore on their faces. Apparently, they were pretty poor actors. They couldn't even portray emotional states very well, so they had to wear masks. But the idea is that the other layer of the mask is what other people perceive. The inside of the mask, the inner layer that actually goes to the face, is the sense of identity, who the person thinks he or she is. Well, that sense of identity is intertwined with the somatic sensations in the body, holding tension in certain ways, having certain afflictions or injuries or repetitive misuse of their body adds to that. And eventually the person gets so used to holding this pattern of tension that if you completely eradicate tension from their body, just massage the hell out of them, and then get them to stand up and walk around, they won't feel like themselves. That's one of the reasons why massage often doesn't hold very well, because if you actually take away what the person is used to, they will revert very quickly to their habitual holding pattern because they don't feel like themselves without it. Does it make sense?
Totally. And that's really what I love about Qigong, because it's so gentle and it's so graceful that it gives you, a whole other felt sense of movement and stillness. And also, because it's so vast and related to the Taoist teachings, it begins to really bring you a very centered feeling, and you're going beyond all this trauma and these holding patterns, which I'm very familiar with.
Well, no one really goes beyond holding patterns with Qigong. I'm sorry to tell you that, but 99.9% of all Qigong that I'm aware of, and as you know, I'm aware of a lot of different styles of Qigong. I interviewed hundreds of people who are Qigong masters on my talk show, The Secrets of Qigong Masters, and nobody talks about it in Qigong community except for you and me. What happens as a result of that is that people try to do certain Qigong exercises to break through the energy blockages or get rid of them because they think they're bad. Well, like I mentioned just a minute ago, if you try to break through the energy blockages or push the energy where you think it should go, or think the blockages are bad and you try to get rid of them, you're not addressing the root cause. Why is the blockage there in the first place? Even if you manage to push the energy somewhere where you think it should go, you're not addressing the reason why it wasn't going where you wanted it to go in the first place. So I don't do Qigong in the way that most people do Qigong. I don't do any forms, period. I don't teach any Qigong techniques. I help people discover what works, understand the principles, and test them. When people test the principles, they develop authentic awareness of why things work this way or that way. And then something really interesting happens. They integrate this new awareness into their daily life, so that I don't teach them Qigong style. I teach them Qigong lifestyle. What happens is that if a person has tension, most likely it's completely unconscious. So if you tell them to stop tensing up, they won't be able to stop. And they've been probably holding this tension for some time, maybe for months or even years. If a person holds tension consciously, they will never be able to hold it for very long. Just try holding tension in any part of your body for more than a few minutes, and you will get really sick and tired of holding it very quickly, because it takes effort. That's one of the reasons why people can't stop holding the holding patterns, is because they do it completely unconsciously. So one of the reasons why I had to develop Qigong coaching methodologies, so that actually people would become aware of that which they do unconsciously. In other words, bring what used to be unconscious to the level of conscious mind. And then they can make conscious choices about it. And it's going to be their choice, not my choice. And that's a beautiful thing, because people are a lot more likely to follow through with their own choices than the choices that are given to them by others. Even an authority figure, as you mentioned, people have a resistance to authority figures telling them what to do or what not to do. And so if the person discovers for themselves how they're holding themselves and why they're holding themselves this way, then they can address the reasons why they hold themselves in a certain way, or change the way they hold themselves to at least discover that it's not the only way to hold. In other words, they start getting a handle on their own holding patterns. Quite literally, I invite them to experiment with their holding patterns. If the person has tension, for example, in the shoulders, I say, well, interesting how you hold your shoulders. Now, I wonder if you can help me develop similar holding pattern. I really like the way you are, so I would like to be more like you. Usually they say, no, you don't want to be like me. I'm in pain, I'm suffering. You don't want to experience what I experience. Of course, they say, look, I'm a compassionate person. I want to experience what you're experiencing at least for a minute or two. Don't worry, I'm not going to get stuck in this holding pattern. I'm going to get out of it because I'm doing it consciously. So how can you help me achieve that level of misalignment in my body? And so the person may actually grab my shoulders and say, well, the shoulder needs to be here and the shoulder needs to be over there. And maybe you need to slouch a little bit and maybe get your head a little bit like this. Oh, yeah, now you look like me. Oh, wait, your pelvis also needs to be a little bit tucked this way. And the knees need to be kind of rolled inwards a little bit. And you pronate your ankles. Yeah, now you're really screwed up. Now you're like me. I say, oh, thank you so much for helping me become more like you. I can actually feel how you feel now. And so as a compassionate person, I feel like it's okay for me to experience a little bit of suffering. As a matter of fact, that's what compassion means. Passion means suffering, and calm means together in Latin. So suffering together is what we do as compassionate, empathetic people. And so what we do is we develop sense of rapport, because we operate on the same frequency of energy of consciousness now. As we establish rapport, we develop certain understanding and deep insight into what's going on with the other person. It makes it easier to also create an effect on that person. So what do? Well, I invite them to exaggerate their own holding pattern. So for example, if they were already like this, I invite them to do just a little bit more. Not too much more, because that will send them into a spasm probably. But just a few degrees, a few percent points, a little bit more tension. But now they're doing it consciously. As they're doing it consciously, now they are subject to exact same situation. When they do something consciously, like tension, they become aware of how uncomfortable it is to be tense like this for a long time. So just a few minutes later, they start asking me, hey, I'm kind of feeling really sick and tired of this holding pattern. Is it okay if I stop tensing? I say, well, don't just stop tensing yet. If you want to become less tense, just reduce this tension by 5%, maybe 10%. Maybe it will go just where you were before. Maybe go a little bit further down, maybe 5 to 10% lower. So maybe if you were at 60, 65% of tension, well, now let's go to 50, 55. Now let's go a little bit further down, maybe to 40%. All right, now let's release it a little bit further down, stair-stepping down to 30 and 20 and 10%. And maybe even further down to 5%. Now, we don't have to go down to 0 and become limp like a noodle. We need to have a little bit of healthy muscle tone, right? So it's okay to have a little bit of tension. But now the person becomes highly aware of how they create this tension, what they're doing to create this tension, and they know that now what they need to stop doing. Basically, now they have freedom of choice, whether to keep doing it or to quit doing it. It's a matter of non-doing. You cannot tell the muscles to relax because there is no signal of relaxation. So you basically train your central nervous system to send fewer signals of contraction. And you develop this ability to stair step and go higher and lower in terms of level of tension at will. Now, as you go up and down, you can test. How does this affect the level of health or vitality in different parts of my body? So essentially, you test. You don't just assume that this is going to be good for you. This is what most therapists and doctors do. They basically have knowledge that the layman doesn't have, and then they just simply dispense this knowledge as if they assume that they know better what is for their patient than the patient knows themselves. I don't want to assume anything. I want to operate on the basis of testing, trial, and error. And it's okay to have an error in this because you're not going to make things much worse anyway. If you tense up and it feels like, oh crap, it's really tense, well, you just simply release the tension a notch. Now, what happens as a result of this is something ridiculously easy. The person becomes aware of their own ways of holding tension. But as long as they stick with their old sense of identity, they will revert back to their old pattern of tension because they will just simply not identify with that new way of being more relaxed. So they actually need to work on that sense of identity. And that's where coaching comes handy. You cannot just assume that the person will remain this way because they experienced this breakthrough in their session. That's exactly what I discovered through my work at coaching at the Portland Qigong Clinic. People were experiencing great breakthroughs right in front of my eyes in a matter of a few minutes or maybe a half an hour in a session, but then they would go home and backslide. They would backslide simply because they reverted back to their habitual way of being. So it's a very ontological study of how you are. And you are the way you move. So if you want to experience greater harmony in your life, you need to learn how to move more harmoniously. So instead of Qigong forms and certain moves, I don't teach the moves. I teach the culture of movement. I mean, there are certain techniques that I also teach, but those are based on the principles. So we test the principles. For example, principle of being grounded. Well, you can test whether you're more grounded or less grounded. And when you know how to get more grounded, then you can refine that ability even more. And so that becomes an exploration of how grounded you can become. Similarly, for example, you can discover what it's like to be centered. As a matter of fact, I think I would like to offer a centering exercise today in just a few minutes that is going to be so simple and so extremely effective in discovering equipoise that most people will be surprised that they haven't done this until now. Are you familiar with the term equipoise?
Oh, yes. Yes.
Essentially,
Yes.
equipoise is like a somatic manifestation of the state of equanimity. Equanimity is the mental state of not attachment nor aversion. You are neither attached to some things that you really like, nor are you feeling averse to some things that you don't like. Instead, you maintain equanimity without putting labels on things such as good or bad or right and wrong. Now, if you maintain such a centered state of mind, it manifests somatically in a state of equanimity, in a state of equipoise. Equipoise is basically a condition of the physical body where you are resting the weight of the body on the bone structure, on the skeleton. Now, when your bones do the work supporting your weight against the gravity, that means the muscles can relax. Muscles are never as strong as bones. And if muscles try to compensate for misalignment of the bone structure or a certain crookedness of posture, postural misalignment, as they call it, now muscles will be getting tired, they will be developing energy blockages like we just talked about, and generally they will become overworked and underpaid, and they will start complaining. And these complaints that we receive are usually perceived as pain or some degree of discomfort, and also limitation in range of motion. But if we learn how to develop a state of equipoise, muscles don't have to work so hard. They may work a little bit just to keep us from losing balance if there is anything affecting us, or if we're walking, or if we're turning, or doing anything. But basically, we use the muscles for support to the minimal degree. Most of the support work is done using bones, which is the representation of the element of earth in the body. And bones are strong and capable of supporting us, unlike the muscles. They don't burn any energy. They don't waste any resources. They actually like being compressed. And so what we do is we use the tricks of the trade, so to speak, in order to develop equipoise by finding equanimity. Equanimity is, as I said, the state of neither attachment nor aversion. It also may have to do with fears. So you're neither fearful nor foolhardy. It also may have to do with judgment. Basically, you're neither judging anything as good nor bad. It may also be associated with a sense of self-esteem. You're neither full of yourself, like narcissist, nor do you suffer from low self-esteem or depression. You basically find yourself in that neutral space of what Buddhism often referred to as the Noble Middle Path. And this creates a situation where the physical body actually can reside in the center of its energy field. So again, we get back to the energy arts, the Qigong, because it's important to understand that we are surrounded with an energy field. Some people perceive it as aura. In Chinese medicine, it's referred to as Wei Qi. And there are different layers of this Wei Qi or energy body or energy field around us. Well, if the physical body is not in the center of the energy field surrounding it, or in other words, if the energy field is askew in relation to the physical body, it's all relative, right? Then it's guaranteed to affect our alignment adversely. In other words, create misalignment. It's like, imagine, for example, the aura around my body, or like an energy bubble, is askew and, for example, pulling me in this direction. Well, I'm not going to be balanced. There's going to be more weight on one leg than the other. There's going to be more tension on one side of the other. The opposite shoulder will be jacked up. My whole spine will basically assume the S curve, like in scoliosis. That's because my energy field is making me crooked, pulling me off center. Or you can say that maybe it's the physical body that's off center of its own energy field. Now, what do? Do we manipulate the energy so that it would be more evenly distributed around physical body? Or do we move the physical body so that it would catch up with the movement of its energy field? Now, most Qigong practitioners would say, let's manipulate energy. Well, I have a radically different approach. Instead of doing something to the energy, what I think is right, I actually trust the energy knows what it's doing. In other words, energy always flows where the laws of nature tell it to flow. And if we try to manipulate it or control it or direct it where we think it should go, it will be governed by our understanding, to whatever degree we have this understanding of what's good and what's bad. And it's still no equanimity, because we're still deeming something good and something bad. And if we're trying to get from point A to point B, assuming that point B is a good place to be, so we want to run away from point A because it's not so good, we are struggling or suffering here, and so we want to go elsewhere, and this is where the promised land is. Well, there is no promised land, I'm sorry to tell you that, but Basically, the grass is always greener on the other side. Once you get to the other side, you realize, oh, the grass is always greener on that side. All of a sudden, you want to go back. Basically, there is a constant sense of dissatisfaction most people experience when they are in a state of judgment. So we also have to release judgment. What is it called? It's called acceptance. We learn acceptance, starting with ourselves. We have to accept ourselves the way we are, even though we may be screwed up and in pain and suffering. We still have to accept ourselves first so that we can move on from here. In other words, we have to have a solid foundation to push off of to take the next step. In which direction are we going to take the step? Well, we're going to test. We're not going to assume that the coach or Qigong master or any other guru knows what the next step should be. We actually are going to ask our coaching client, what do you think the next step would be? Well, let's find out what would be the most optimal course of action for you. So then we actually start experimenting with a variety of different courses of action, even though I may understand that there is a particular course of action that would be most beneficial for the person under such circumstances. I don't want to impose that. I want them to discover the wheel. If the person reinvents the wheel, they'll never forget how the wheel works. And so that means they will be able to assimilate this knowledge and integrate it into their lifestyle. And that's exactly why Qigong coaching is so effective. It's not telling people this is the right exercise to do or this is the right meditation to practice. You are simply practicing explorations, no exercises. It's explorations. You experiment with things. And through trial and error, you discover there are certain things that actually yield more positive results. Well, if I do more of that, it stands to reason I will get more positive results. If I do something else, well, maybe I'll get different results. Now, that's an invitation to check for insanity. If a person keeps doing the same thing, expecting different results, that's a sign of insanity. So they basically need to check their own sanity and make sane decisions. That's, again, where a coach comes handy. I inspire and empower my coaching clients to make the most sane decisions. And these decisions are not based on judgments or labels of what's good and what's bad. Now, if you don't use these labels, you have to use something else, because how else are you going to make decisions, right? Something has to inform you as to which course of action to choose. Well, there is something really, really intelligent that allows us to do exactly that. It's called energy resonance. We actually check for energy resonance. The path, the course of action that you resonate most with is going to feel one way. How do you feel in your body when you are on that path? When you take actions going in this direction? If you resonate with something, for example, a piece of music, you can listen to it for hours and enjoy. If you can't stand a piece of music, for example, you listen to it for a few seconds, maybe a minute maximum, you already start cringing, right? You start developing tension. You start feeling like your breathing becomes more shallow. You become more stressed out, just influenced by sounds that you can't stand. Now, if music can affect you, everything else also can. And so what we do is we test how the body feels when it travels following certain course of action. If it becomes more relaxed, if the breathing becomes deeper and smoother, or a person starts yawning, if the energy blockages start disappearing by themselves, almost miraculously, what does it mean? Well, it means that we're on the right track. We're moving in the direction of greater resonance. Now, on the other hand, if a person starts feeling like they're more tense or they're cringing or they're becoming more stressed, you check their breathing is shallow and rapid. That most likely means that they are going in the direction of dissonance or not a very good resonance. So what happens then is, instead of trying to fix the tensions or do breathing exercises to breathe right, we realize that The root cause of this is not that the person doesn't know how to breathe. Everybody knows how to breathe from childhood. We all are capable of breathing. We have been breathing all this time, and we're still alive. How natural we are in our breath, that's the question. What is natural is usually most healthful. What can be healthier than being natural, right? Well, so what we do is we simply find the conditions that facilitate natural breathing, that facilitate natural relaxation, that facilitate natural sense of harmony in our minds. And then, as we find these conditions, we develop habits. In other words, we repeat these conditions, or we revisit these conditions over and over to develop the habit of being that way. We also have certain practices that kind of help integrate certain states of consciousness or habits, the newly developed habits in our lifestyles, which is, again, where coaching really departs from therapy or doing any other type of Qigong practices. But at the same time, this is still energy awareness practices. These are still practices based on a sense of energy flowing in the body. We just don't manipulate that energy flow. We learn how to feel the flow and how to adapt to the flow so that we are in the flow. It's when you are in the flow, that's when you experience the most profound sense of wellness and well-being and relaxation. And essentially, that's what Qigong coaching empowers people to do. They experience more flow in their lives. Does that make sense?
Totally. This has been really, really so much deep information. Now you're talking about practices. You have a practice for us.
Yes, I have a wonderful practice that I would love to share. It's something that is so simple and may even remind you of some Qigong practices from different styles. They go by different names. It's a practice of centering, or centering exercise, if you will. And what we're going to do is we're going to simply jump and land softly. You don't have to jump high. Just jump an inch or two off the ground, maybe a little bit higher if you feel like you've got a spring in your step, or if you're a spring chicken. So when you jump, for a moment, your body is in weightlessness. For a moment, you are not subjected to gravity squashing you. You actually are in a moment of suspended levitation almost. It's just a split second, but it's enough time for the vertebra to find their correct places. We don't need to adjust our vertebra, we just simply need to let them find home, so to speak. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to figure out how to turn from side to side. And as we're turning, we are going to focus 100% of our attention on the axis of rotation. Well, that's the center of the body. In Tai Chi, for example, they refer to it as a Tai Chi pole. Basically, it's the central channel that goes along the center of the body from Bai Hui Point through Huyin Point and all the way down to the center of planet Earth. Obviously, it's a vertical plumb line. And as you pivot from side to side around your center, see if your center of mass also is in alignment with the center of rotation. What we're looking for is something similar to a spinning top. You know, like if you spin a spinning top and its center of mass is slightly eccentric, it will spin off out of balance very quickly. But if the center of rotation of the spinning top and its center of mass are in alignment, you spin it and it will actually maintain gyroscopic stability for a while. That's what we're looking for. We test to check how stable we are by simply turning from side to side. And the wonderful thing about it is that the axis of rotation ideally will coincide with the position of the spine. In other words, the more the spine is in alignment with this axis of rotation, the more the center of mass, and most people experience center of mass, or they think the center of mass is actually not where the center of mass really is. The center of mass is not somewhere here in the stomach, or some people think that's where lower dantian is. The center of mass is actually much further back, towards the spine. The backbone, as the name implies, is towards the back. That's where most of the dense tissue, the bones, are located. The rest of the body is mostly fluids and fat and proteins. But the densest part of the body, the bone structure, the skeleton, is mostly towards the back. The backbone is towards the back. The shoulder blades are towards the back. Most of the rib cage is towards the back. And most of the pelvis is towards the back. So that's where the center of mass is actually located, not at the stomach. It's much closer to the tailbone or towards the area of Ming Man and the lumbar spine. What we do is we learn how to rotate around this area of the lumbar spine and also bring the head into alignment so that the real top of the head is on top. By real top of the head, I mean by waypoint. Most people think that the top of the head is somewhere here, which it isn't. They can even try to look taller by lifting the head like this, but actually they become shorter. You actually become shorter because the head is more flat on this side. If you bring the real top of the head on top, you actually become a half an inch to maybe even an inch taller, but your eyes are lower, so you're not looking down on other people. So you may relatively feel shorter, but you are actually taller. So it's one of those paradoxes that we experience in our physical bodies. So what we do is we bring the real top of the head on top. And by doing that, we also release tension in the neck muscles. If the neck muscles are tense, it means they're doing too much work. Because the weight of the head is quite substantial. It's 12, 13 pounds, depending on how much hair you have, I guess, how many gold teeth you have. Essentially, it's the weight of a heavy bowling ball. Now, the size of the vertebra of the neck is very small. The first and second vertebra of the neck are maybe the thickness of the fingertip. In other words, not very thick. To balance the bowling ball on a fingertip is challenging. Any misalignment means the neck muscles have to work quite hard. Now, if the bones are aligned, they don't have to work. If you align the bones of the neck and rest the weight of the noggin on the cervical spine, your neck muscles actually can relax. And when you release the tension in the neck, the energy starts flowing freely between the head and the rest of the body. Most people don't get stuck in the body, by the way. They get stuck in their heads when they have this kind of energy blockage. So we reconnect the head with the rest of the body. We connect the upper dantian and the lower dantian, allowing circulation to occur naturally and spontaneously. So instead of doing macrocosmic orbit, forcing the energy to go where we think it should go, we allow it to flow and observe. Instead of intending to push the energy where we think it should go, we exercise attention, which is not very difficult to do if we just simply accept that which is happening. So acceptance is a prerequisite for attention. Now, when we experience this level of acceptance and alignment, we experience something akin to equipoise, that somatic manifestation of equanimity. And as I mentioned, when we look at how the mind affects the body, for example, in the case of body language or postural misalignments associated with holding patterns, there is also the effect in reverse. The body also affects the mind. This is the same organism. So the mind and body are like two sides of the same coin, so to speak, the heads and tails. You turn the coin this way or that way, both follow suit. So one side follows the other. Now, some people have screwed up coins. In other words, the mind and body are not in cahoots. It's like if you look at the way that many coins are minted in America, for example, you can see that the heads are kind of upside down or crooked in relation to the tails. Now, if they mint coins for the entire country this way, what do you expect of the citizens? So what happens is that we experience all kinds of misalignments between mind and body. But what is it that connects the body and the mind in one organism? Well, it's the life force. That's what keeps us alive, what keeps the mind and body together. That's what that coin is made of. So instead of just trying to manipulate the heads or the tails, we start working with the whole coin. And that is what we also refer to as holistic approach to health. We work with the entire organism, first and foremost, working with energy rather than working against it. We learn how to flow with it rather than try to manipulate it. And we learn how to align our minds and our bodies with the flow so that we can enjoy being in the flow.
You've given us so much fuel for contemplation and really looking into the depths of this body-mind connection, how we hold ourselves. We really appreciate it. So tell me and tell us, how do we get in touch with you if we want to learn more?
As the pioneer of Qigong coaching, one of my websites is qigongcoaching.com.
Thank you so much, Lama Tantrapa, for bringing your experience and your wisdom and your insight to all of us today. To all of you, drink this in. It's delicious, isn't it? Take it deep in you and let this knowledge, this wisdom, this chi, this life force energy suffuse you, inspire you, and take it in and bring it out to your family, to the community, so that we can help to heal not only ourselves and our community, but our world and our planet that needs us so much now. I'm Sharron Rose. Thank you for joining us for the Qigong Global Summit with the Shift Network. May the Qi be with you.
Thank you for joining us for the Qigong Global Summit. To learn about our global community, visit theshiftnetwork.com. And please share these powerful sessions with your friends and family.